Welcome to In Pursuit of Clarity, episode number 23, entitled Conservation of Beauty or a Liberal Embrace of Chaos. In listening to some lectures and interviews by Roger Scruton recently, a thinker I highly recommend and a representative of the old guard of conservatism and rightist thinking that seems to have all but disappeared as money has begun to completely run the political and academic show, he made the valuable point that the instinct towards conservatism, and we might even say the instinct to conserve, arises from the desire of having something worthwhile to protect or maintain. The more I thought about the topic, the more I wanted to discuss what I feel are the fundamental differences between the right and the left. One might even say the archetypal differences. The essence of each and how they compare and contrast, because I find it fascinating and telling and informative when we pull back our perspective and move beyond the day-to-day superficial political battles and take a more philosophical approach. I was also struck by this marked contrast throughout history, part of which I'll be discussing in the next Subverted History video, and comparing the great Gothic leader Theodoric with the Eastern Roman Empire Justinian, two men who I believe well represented this divergence. It's said that Justinian was obsessed with newness and novelty, and embraced nearly everything that fell under this umbrella, nearly unconditionally, and one might say haphazardly. He was liberal at heart. He welcomed virtually all change as good, positive, progressive. Theodoric, on the other hand, although at the head of a conquering Gothic element in Rome, seemed to have a great deal of respect for old Rome, traditional Rome, and all that which built her and caused her to become strong and fueled her greatness. The Gothic leaders seem to have more respect and admiration for this bygone era and empire than the vast majority of Romans they came to rule over. And there's a quote by Theodoric that well sums up this mentality, and I believe sums up much traditionalist and conservative thought. Quote, "Reverently to preserve the old is even better than building afresh." While Justinian was bankrupting his people and empire by engaging in massive-scale building projects they neither wanted nor had the means to afford, Theodoric restored an unprecedented peace and prosperity to Western Rome, in part by doing the opposite. In restoring all practices with regards to governance and economy and culture, which had proven to work so well, and making adjustments sparingly and slowly and carefully. Those of us of a rightist ideological bent do seek to, as Roger Scruton put it, preserve, protect, and maintain. I believe this comes from having a meaningful heritage, being cognizant of its value, and lacking that self-important arrogance that seems so sure it knows better. I found this paragraph buried in my notes, and I believe I've shared it in a tweet at some point in the past, by way of analogy. Quote, "Picture a dusty, ancient-looking book, in which each and every one of your ancestors, stretching back into the dawn of time, wrote a single line aiming to convey the most valuable lesson they felt able to convey to posterity, after the sum total of their years and life experiences. Now picture setting that book on fire, and turning your back on it as it burns." End quote. This may not be an entirely fair characterization of the liberal ethos, but it's not far off, and helps represent this core difference in nature and outlook. They may consider the burning of this book to be progress. Perhaps portions of the book don't suit their subjective conception of justice, perhaps other parts seem too harsh or strict, and perhaps turning this vast storehouse of accumulated wisdom into a heap of ash and ember is actually viewed as a step forward accordingly. It seems many on that side of the fence have wholly embraced this conception that humanity steadily marches forward, that we have a clear conception of history and all of the mistakes made therein, thus we no longer make such mistakes, and all forward inertia carries us towards bigger and brighter and better. And because of this, coupled with perceived injustices of the past, and the common view on the left that up until recently nearly all peoples in any region or time period were dirty, desperate, and barely eking out a miserable life, they feel justified in these beliefs. I happen to personally believe this is complete madness, and that the unconditional embrace of the new and novel at every turn is practically definitive proof that they don't understand the broad sweep of historical context. But many on the left do genuinely believe this, and I'm constantly stunned at just how little they seem to think of those who came before us. And this attitude is especially pervasive in modern academia, modern being the key word, as these opinions would have been laughed out of any institution of higher learning prior to approximately World War II. It's as if they believe that during the past few decades, not only have our brains grown exponentially, somehow, but our women's studies, our courses on diversity, the very modern philosophies of the deconstructionist and protest-obsessed intellectuals represent the truest form of knowledge and education. Naturally, goes this line of thinking, if our prior world lacked this type of intellectual enlightenment, it must have been a brutish and horrible place. And there's something deeper going on here. Friedrich Nietzsche used the term resentment to describe what he believed was a driving force among certain groups of people. The word is the French form of resentment, with an extra S and an I after resent, and I encourage everybody to remember it. It's of fundamental importance when trying to describe or understand the psychological dynamics at play here. It's defined as a psychological state arising from suppressed feelings of envy and hatred that cannot be acted upon. And at the risk of offending, I've come to believe this is at the heart of much of the thinking on the other side of the fence. I believe many on the left, for lack of a better term here, are naturally unhappy, protesting rebels. And in fact, one of the first red flags for me was watching closely the mannerisms and facial expressions, and listening to the intonation and cadence and manner of speaking of those who most aggressively championed their ideas. I sensed envy, anger, and even profound malevolence in some cases, and a great deal of unhappiness. I encourage you to do the same. Watch the faces, and especially the micro-expressions, of those you see in public life championing far-left ideas. You'll often catch brief glimpses of expressions that seem hateful or full of rage, and some might be justifiably labeled grotesque. The reason these are telling is because, as strange as it sounds, we create our face throughout our lives. Our muscles develop according to our usual expressions. Most people simply don't have the ability to cause their faces to unconsciously slip into the expression of such dark emotions so naturally during a brief discussion or interview or lecture. Peter Strzok is a good example of this. Going back to the initial point about the conservative mentality arising from a desire to preserve and protect, one only preserves and protects something they are happy with, something they find pleasing or healthy. This is the beauty of the conservative ethos. We not only recognize the immense value of the wisdom and traditions and ideas of those who came before us, but we often deeply resonate with them and feel comfortable with them. They please us and make us happy. Imagine for a moment not having roots you valued, or a heritage you considered worthwhile. Imagine having to grasp onto anything and everything that shows any promise in an attempt to find this, to create it anew out of whole cloth. Imagine feeling great resentment towards those who weren't engaged in this frenetic search, those who had found some balance and harmony, those who had found order to counteract that desperate chaos. Western culture, as Theodoric well represents, traditionally had a heritage stretching back through recorded history that provided very firm ground to stand on. We moved very slowly, but because of this, very surely. Our leaders weren't taken with this modern conception of self-love, which stems from ignorance and inevitably leads to arrogance, but instead followed the template set for them by the best and brightest that had come before, as a rule, and deviating only in exceptional circumstances. This provided immense comfort, security, strength, and confidence, and these, I believe, led to a very real happiness. Those who lacked this, and especially those who sought to destroy this, looked in from the outside with ever-building resentment, and I've come to believe their modern philosophies are something of a manifested representation of these negative feelings. I speak of Saul Alinsky often, but I might just as well use any one of the Frankfurt School, or any of their intellectual allies, to help illustrate the polar opposite philosophy to the conservationist ideas just outlined. Alinsky dedicated his book to Lucifer, known as the Eternal Rebel, and in doing so, I believe he showed a deep understanding of his true nature. This is the core of their philosophy. It's a permanent, eternal protest against what we might consider a natural order of things. When one tears to pieces the templates and blueprints and collected wisdom of all previous ages, a Pandora's box of immense complexity and confusion and chaos is opened, and one is all but inevitably doomed to run from one thing to the next, seeking that secure foundation, that solidity or central pillar that provides our moorings and bearings, and around which all else can best be oriented. And another major difference is that the leftist philosophers believe we live in a post-truth world. And if there is no truth, if all is relative and open to interpretation, that leaves only power to fight for. I believe this is at the heart of the reason so many of the left seem to seek power for power's sake, or view all of life as a rat race in which the leading priority is to get what we can, when we can, at every turn. Historically, great leaders of a conservative temperament would have been horrified at this mentality. Power, to them, was the greatest responsibility. So great that many didn't want to shoulder the burden when the opportunity arose, and the thought of a wrong decision significantly harming their people or nation might forever haunt them. To much of the left, power is now seen as a privilege, a reward. And to outline yet another fundamental difference, when they attain this power, their focus so often seems to be not on the long-term planning to build a healthier and happier and more prosperous nation, but rather an immediate division of spoils. If one wanted to be less kind about it, they might even say the looting of a nation's accumulated wealth, to redistribute to their friends and allies, which plays into the eternal rebel and permanent protest ideas. And lastly, one of the side effects of this lack of a central pillar, this lack of a foundational core on the left, around which to orient all else, is complete freedom in its most negative sense. And this type of complete freedom is complete chaos. The freedom from being dictatorially forced down a path not of our choosing, or that doesn't resonate with us, is a positive thing. And this type of freedom is the sort that, culturally, we've traditionally held in high esteem. However, another definition of freedom exists, which is, in my view, very much a net negative. And this is the freedom from guidance regarding how to best live. To use an analogy, picture you're surrounded by 360 degrees of freedom. As you look around you, debating which direction to head, you see guideposts and signs, lovingly and thoughtfully left there by your ancestors, in the form of customs and traditions and collected wisdom, all created to help lead you towards health and happiness, towards the light, you might say. Now picture having burnt and destroyed all of these, and having nothing but the darkness and the unknown on all sides. Might this lead to a lifetime of mistakes and retraced steps, wasted energy and confusion? I believe our modern world is living proof that it does, and I'm certain we can and will do better. Thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my